So are comics back? Because I'm seeing huge increases in prices, and I think we've already hit our bottom, and now things are starting to go back up because an all-time record just happened for a huge Silver Age key, and it wasn't even close to the last one that sold. So Hakes is an auction house, like there's many of them out there. They just sold a Spider-Man #1, an Amazing Spider-Man #1 in a 9.6, not the highest grade, second highest grade. There's 5 of them on the census, and it just sold for a record price of $520,000. Yes, $520,000, $500,000, $520,000. That is a ton of money. Now you might be wondering, well, what are the previous ones sold? Well, we actually have a comparable because just recently, as last October, so the comic boom happened mid 2021. That's when things were at crazy high prices, and then it was like kind of all over the place, and it started dipping down. But the last one to sell was in October 2020 or 2022, and that one sold for $336,000. That is a huge, huge gain. That is a 55% gain. A 55% gain in less than a year. So basically like 9 months or something like that. And the one that sold previous to that wasn't all the way back in 2005. So there's not that many. Like I said, there's only 5, and usually people, then they have them, they keep them. So the one before that, you have to go all the way back to 2005, and that one sold for $97,000, which is an increase to today's sale of 432%. That is really, 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 really good. So I've always talked about investing in, keys such as a Spider-Man #1. Things now, obviously, not everyone can afford 9.6, but that was a record price. You would think that it would have gone down. Now, Hakes guesstimated that it was going to sell anywhere between $350 and $500, but obviously it beat that guesstimate. And yeah, so that is a huge, huge increase in price. I'm pretty amazed myself. Again, it's not the highest grade. There are 2 9.8s out there. Now you might be wondering, okay, well, that's just one off. What about another one that was their second biggest book in their auction, and that was in a Fantasy 15 at a 7.5. Now, how did that do? That sold for $171,000. Now, the previous one to sell before that was maybe like 6 months or so ago, and it sold for $117,000. So that is almost a 60% increase, like a 55-ish percent, or not percent, $1,000, like $55,000 increase in like 6 months. Now, obviously, if you look at this graph, you can see that it peaked up, and then it went down, and then it went up again. Now, the only reason it has that peak right there is this some fool person, and I'm pretty sure I know who these fools are, is they spent $300,000 on a 7.5. But if you go back and you look at the previous sales before this ridiculous 300,000, it was like 200,000. Then it did the 300. So it's like 180. Then it went up to 220, and then it went up to 300, and then it went down to like 190, and then it went down to the 117, and now back up to what it sell for, 171. So if you get rid of that 300, and I have a feeling I know what those 300s were. So I looked at a couple, and you see all of a sudden just ridiculous, like this high price when nothing else is even close to that. So what happened was during like this huge boom, not just comic boom, there's a huge boom in the, just the whole money market in general. There's a lot of money flowing around because money was cheap. Interest rates were like 2%. And things were super, super cheap. It was really cheap to borrow money. So what ended up happening is a bunch of people invested in these new companies. And you might have seen ads for these companies. There's like, I think it was like Otis and Rally and Alt and tons of these companies where they thought, okay, I'm going to have like comic books or collectible shoes or just collectibles of cards, whatever, collectibles, but you can buy stock in that collectible. You don't actually own the collectible yourself, you just own a percentage of it. And so these companies got millions of dollars in funding, millions. I'm talking about like 25, 50, maybe even $100 million in funding. So what are you going to do? If your whole company is based on one fact of like, we have a collectible, people invest in it. Well, building the platform, no, it's not going to cost you that much. Maybe it's not even, it's probably less than $1 million, maybe between $500,000 to $1 million to build the platform. Not that much actually, because there's really not much you can do on the website. It's not even involved as my website, collectorscomics.com, it's not even close to involved as that. So it's pretty like 500,000 you could probably spend to build a similar website, maybe even cheaper, honestly. I've looked at those sites. They're pretty, it's almost like going to like Wix.com. I think that's like a website thing. It's very similar to that. There's not much going on with the website. So wouldn't cost very much to build a website. So what do you do with this $50 million? Well, okay, so a website, maybe $500,000, get a few staff members, but then you got to have like an actual location where you can house this stuff. So that's got to be top-notch security, that kind of stuff. But most of your money goes into buying these collectibles. So there's like 4, 5, 6 companies like this, and they're probably all bidding against each other and also buying. They came to me and wanted to buy some of our stuff at like a really high premium. They wanted one book but for some reason we didn't sell them. I can't remember why. I think someone else wanted to buy the book, and we'd rather go to the hands of a customer than just some corporation that's probably going to go out of business. That's what I think of those companies. Anyways, so yeah, they wanted to sponsor my videos and stuff like that. And I told them, well, I was nice, but really I don't like those companies and I don't see them having a future other than very small scale. Nonetheless, they got a ton of money, these companies, and so they have to buy product, and their product is top of the line, stuff that's investable, stuff like that. And yeah, so they're the ones that just like had all this free money and needed to spend it. So they're like, yeah, I'll pay all this money, bid against each other, bid it high up, all this kind of buy it off market for a ridiculous price. Like the previous one sold for like $220 or something like that. They're like, I'll pay you $300,000 for it. They're like, okay, sure, because they just need product. It doesn't cost them anything. This is funding for them. And so, yeah, and then they make their money back by people investing in it, and they take a percentage, yada, yada, yada. So that's where these huge one-off spikes usually come from, is people like that. They had a ton of money, and they needed to get rid of their money to buy collectibles. That was it was. But if you look from the 117 that sold earlier this year to 171, that is a 46% increase in that Fantasy 15. And again, it's a 55% increase for that Amazing Spider-Man #1 in less than a year, which is ridiculous. Just crazy, crazy stuff. I've said this many times in my videos. I think that the worst is behind us. And if you look at the stock market and things like that, comics are very slow, because they're not necessities, and most people don't see them as a valid investment a lot of times. So they're very slow moving to deal with the changes of what's actually happening in the economy. So if you look at the stock market, we're almost back to all-time highs for Dow Jones and S&P 500. I think we're down by like 4 to 7% between the two. So we're almost back to all-time highs. So that's very good. Interest rates are really, really high. So it does mean borrowing money is very going to be not happening, and they keep raising the rates. Also, on top of that, since it's hard to borrow money and all that kind of stuff, and it's very expensive, a lot of people will put their monies in like different savings accounts, because you can get a guaranteed like 5% return on your money for savings accounts, different money markets, things like that. So, which is surprising that the stock market is doing as well as it is. Also, since it's hard to borrow, there's not going to be a lot of these companies funding other companies. So there's not going to be a lot of money floating around. But it's a good sign that things are kind of turning around. I think, I've said this before, I think the worst is behind us. Are there comics that are still going to drop? Of course. Are there comics that are going to go up? Of course. But I think what we're going to see is kind of like a leveling off period, which I've noticed for the last like 6 months is this kind of kind of flatline, which is fine. I think what will happen is the rest of the 6 months of the year, you're just going to have interest rates slowly going up, which will kind of squeeze the market. But I think by 2024, we'll see rates coming down. Inflation's already started to come down, or it's not as bad, to previous times. I think it's like 3% or something, 3.5%, as opposed to it was going up by like 8% a month. So it's still high. We're not deflating, but so rates will come down in 2024, but I don't think all of a sudden like things are going to skyrocket again. You're not going to see that. That's not going to happen. What you're going to see is rates slowly come down over years and years and years. Maybe by the end of 2024, it goes, we'll see mortgage rates around the 5%, not the 7% so you see right now, which rates will have come down as well. So we'll see stuff like that. And maybe by 2024, 25 or something like that. We'll see, maybe in the 4%. That's why I'm guessing. That's why I've been researching things like that. So far off, it's hard to tell. But I think if you happen to have money and you don't mind sitting on things, I think this is a good buying opportunity. So I think these are going to be some of the lowest times. Like we saw that Fantasy 15 jump up like 50, 60K in just, a few short months. I think the worst is behind us. And I think we're going to start turning a corner probably by the beginning of next year. So if you can find a cheap deal, definitely go for it. But yeah, amazing all-time record. Have a good day.